Hey guys, Matthew here. In today's video, as promised, we're going to be going over the Omnishot TS, how to level it up, the priorities in terms of the things that you should buy, and how to set up your character for endgame and stuff like that. Now, before anything else, I do want to say that I apologize if the quality is really bad in terms of the sound. My voice is completely dead, so what I had to do is basically turn up the gain on my mic extremely high, so you can actually hear me. So it might spike, the quality might be a little bit bad, but anyways, let's get right into it. Now, before anything else, I do want to say a massive shout out to Jungroan. He's the person who helped me out set up the actual Lvling for this POB, because this is something that I was completely inexperienced with. I think I've maybe ran one or twice Spectral Helix as a leveling skill, so I'm really not used to it, while Mr. Jungroan has probably leveled like 10 million characters with that skill. So he helped me out with the leveling portion of the POB, which is really what we're going to be focusing on today. When it comes to the actual build of Omni TS, most people probably know about it by now, as it was an extremely popular build last league. Now, if you've never seen the build in action, what I'll showcase, because I don't have any characters set up to actually showcase either in standard or in league, as I sold my build, I'll just showcase kind of this was a Forged of Phoenix from my previous video. Now, this was on something like about a 1 exalt budget at the time of recording the video back then. Now, this is before the things, rose in price and whatnot, but this was really budget gear. So you can see just kind of the sort of damage and clear that you can expect even with extremely low budget. So as you can see, for a T16 map, it is getting absolutely destroyed. The damage is very good. The clear is really fast. The build is not a tank in any way, shape, or form. I will say this, and this is going to be my one and only warning. I highly recommend, if you are either a newer player or a casual player, do not league start with this, okay? It's really good and the ceiling is extremely high, but if you don't know what you're doing and if you're not going to be making currency quickly, do not league start with this. You're going to have a bad time and you're probably going to blame me for it, which is completely understandable. But now, because I warned you, I'm not taking any responsibility for people who are going to fail their league start due to this build. The reality is you need to play this build properly in order to get the most out of it early on. Now, once you start stacking good damage and good defenses, this build becomes one of the most brain dead build I've ever played. Literally one button, one hand, ridiculous. One shots literally everything in the game, the feared, the uber bosses, whatever, and is insanely tanky. I'm talking can face tank wave 30 simulacrums. But before you get to that point, that's not the case, okay? But I digress. Let's get into the POB because there's a lot to talk about. So as always, the POB is going to have all of the leveling notes. So in terms of how to go about leveling the build, we are going to be using initially Splitting Steel and Chance to Bleed with Onslaught. And this is going to be from a Mule, from a Duelist. Now, once we've muled Splitting Steel and Chance to Bleed, as well as a Corroded Blade, we are going to make our Ranger character and be on our way. So we're going to level with that until level 12, where we're going to swap into Spectral Helix, and then everything else is listed in the actual notes, so you know exactly what to do and when to do it, what support, what auras to run, etc. Everything is here. I've been working on this POB for something like the past 6 hours, so there's a lot of work put into this, so it should be very smooth. Now, looking at the tree, it's going to be the same situation. You're going to have many trees in this POB. As you can see, there's quite a few of them, because there's many times where you're going to be swapping what we're doing. So looking at it, there's going to be the progression trees, Brutus going into Merveil, and then in the first thing that you're going to rush after that is going to be Forces of Nature. Now, this is an extremely strong node while leveling, 10% penetration, and the mastery is also really good. Exposure you inflict applies at least minus 18% to affected resistances. So we're going to be using Frost Bomb in order to apply this all the way until we actually get Hydrosphere around level 34. But it's actually not going to be at level 34, it's going to be in Act 6. So whatever level you are in Act 6 is when you're going to be able to drop Frost Bomb. Early on, we're going to be using Frost Bomb. We're not going to use this often, it's just really going to be for those pesky single target. But for the majority of the monsters, Spectral Helix has insane built-in damage already. Next, we're going to go to Dominus. Now, as we are going up here, it's going to be very important that we grab these two masteries here. This one has supported skills by Nightblade have 40% effective elusive, and then the elusive grant 40% critical strike multiplier for skills supported by elusive. Now the hidden portion of this dagger mastery here, which has 40% critical strike multiplier for skills supported by Nightblade, which is absolutely busted, is that this is scaled by elusive effect, which means if you had no elusive effect, this is just going to be 40% multi. However, if you had, say, 100% increased elusive effect, well, guess what? It's going to be 80% multi. And then imagine if you had, like, I don't know, 300. Well, you get a lot of multiplier. How much multiplier, you ask? Okay, well, let me show you just how much multiplier you get. So this is Spectral Helix, right? We're going to look at it. Looking at our Spectral Helix over here. And then we're going to have to change to a generic claw. Well, there we have it, 588 critical strike multiplier from these two masteries. It is absolutely bonkers how much damage you will have when you actually swap into the Helix setup. Now, when you're going to do that is around level 34. Yeah, around 34 or 32, 34, something like that. When you get these two masteries and after your initial normal lab is when we're going to do that. Again, everything is in the actual notes. Now, after that, we are basically going to start running up the tree with defenses because our damage is going to be bonkers and our speed as well. The thing about elusive is that it gives us a lot of speed. Now, one thing that is really important to remember when it comes to elusive is Withering Step. Now, the actual effective elusive cannot be stacked, which means if you get elusive from Nightblade, you can't also get elusive from Withering Step on top of it. But the elusive effect from Withering Step will reset so that when you crit again from Nightblade, that will actually reset your elusive effect. So that will keep you at a very high percentage of this critical strike multiplier because elusive effect does go down as elusive is going. So that's also in the notes, the importance of actually having Withering Step on left click with attack without moving, so that basically as you're holding down left click, it's constantly going to be using Withering Step, and then at the moment you crit, it's going to refresh that elusive from the actual Nightblade support, which is why it's so strong. But again, after that, we're going to start to round up some defenses. So we're going to go down, grab some more life, grab some leech over here because we're not getting this life node over here, life raker. It's not necessary. We'll have plenty from just Clever Thief. Next, after that, Blood Aqueducts. This is where we really start to go deep into defenses because our damage is so good. Now we'll grab this mastery here for the reservation, more reservation here, and some this is where we also start grabbing suppression. So at that point we'll start running, and Blood Aqueducts is the time where we'll start running Grace, Determination, Defiance, Banner. We do not need any offensive auras on this build. However, we'll still be able to run Herald of Ice once we have this set up at level 60, which is nice because Herald of Ice is good for clearing. Also good for Trinity, but that's kind of what we're going to be running here in Blood Aqueducts. Then we have level 75 tree. At that point, what's going to happen is we're going to start going upwards because a lot of the leveling is you're actually going to be playing Helix for quite some time because we don't know the price of the amulet, right? The omniscience, crystallized omniscience amulet. We don't know how expensive it's going to be. We also don't know how expensive all the other items for omniscience in general are going to be either. So if they are expensive, you might have to play this build for more than just a few hours. It might just be a few days, obviously depending how much currency you make, depending how much you play. Which is why I said I wouldn't really recommend this build for newer players. It's definitely something you can re-roll into on like day 4, day 5 once you have a little bit of currency, however. But for the more advanced players or the people who just want to go for it, it's definitely a very strong starter. So we're going to go Ghost Dance, and this is going to require us to get Energy Shield. So we're going to go Written in Blood, and this build is also quite hungry when it comes to intelligence. We need 155 intelligence, 155 strength, and 155 dexterity. Now the dexterity is easy, it's all over the place. The strength and the intelligence, not so much. So that's why we're going to do that. And yeah, we're going to go with Ghost Dance. This is going to be very good because you're going to stack a lot of evasion, as you'll see a little bit later on. Okay, and then I even have a tree at level 90. So this is going to be the last tree for Helix. Now I'm guessing around level 90, you'll probably have enough currency to go into the actual Omni TS. If not, well then just, I don't know, grab some life or whatever. It doesn't really matter what you want to do. But level 90 is where I stopped the actual Helix tree. and it looks something like this. Now what you'll see in this tree is that I try to absolutely minimize the number of regrets that you are going to need. Now because this is a build, unlike Seismic, that you're not going to respec around say level 60 or 70, you're going to have a lot more time to gain currency in order to get, you know, the regrets to actually be able to swap the build. But I still tried to make the tree as similar as possible to the actual Omni tree once we swapped to that. So the Omni tree starts at level 90 because again, I don't expect anyone to be able to have the currency or the amulet or all the stuff required before that. You know, because it's not just the amulet. You need a bow, you need a quiver, you need items with attributes on them. There's quite a few things that you need. But once you get to level 90, this is going to be the Omni tree. So as you can see, there's very minimal respec. We're basically going to be respecing a lot of the stuff up here, but otherwise it's going to be very, very similar. So it should be very minimal on the regrets required. I'm thinking, I think I did the math earlier and it was less than 20 total regrets or something, so it should be quite good. Okay. Next, we have another tree, which is the level 90 once we get to the budget setup. So this is for the extreme budget setup, but once we get to the budget setup, and I'll be going over that later on when we talk about the items, you'll see there's another tree for that. Nothing really changes, or very minimal changes, but essentially we're going to drop a lot of suppression as we're going to get it on our gear instead. We're going to drop this resistance as we're going to get it on our gear, and this is going to allow us to get more defenses and also more damage. So that's kind of what's going to be happening here. Next, we have the final tree, which is where I kind of stop my entry, I guess you could say, League starter version, and this is going to be going for tankiness. Now, I don't think that you should go for the high budget or even the medium high budget that I previously advertised, during Arch Nemesis League. That was super squishy. I think as soon as you can start investing into defenses, this build has so much damage, it just doesn't make sense not to do it. So this is a level 92 tree, and what you'll see here, the big difference is we're dropping the jewel over here, which is what's it called again, which is Lioneye's Fall. Instead, we are going to start working on some cluster jewels. Now this is going to give us a lot more freedom and a lot more jewel sockets, which is going to be very, very good, because this build, if you want to be tanky, is going to require a lot of jewel sockets. So looking at the actual cluster setups, actually I guess we'll do that when we look at the items for different investment levels. But yeah, so that's where it ends. Now if you want to push it past level 92, again, it's kind of up to you what you want to grab. You can grab more life, you can grab more damage, you can grab more attack speed. It really is up to you. Now, looking at the actual skill gems, I've basically got 3 blocks. The first block is your actual Spectral Helix, and this is going to be your endgame setup, right, until you swap into Tornado Shot. Next, we have the Tornado Shot for the entry level. So when you swap into Tornado Shot, as well as just the, basically prior to going with the tank version. And then finally, the last block is once you actually swap into Tornado Shot with the actual tank version. The biggest difference here is that the ores are going to change. You're going to start running Determination, and your utility stuff is also going to change a little bit. Oh, someone actually messaged me in Path of Exile. My bad. So yeah, that's also going to change. Now, these are the 3 main blocks. Everything else is going to be under the notes. So again, you shouldn't have any issues there. Now, the last thing we need to look at, and there's quite a few things to talk about, is going to be the itemization for this build. Both the Spectral Helix has very specific itemization, and of course, Omniscience has even more specific. So looking at the itemization for Spectral Helix, what's going to be very important is basically going to be flat elemental on your claw. So I'd recommend getting a deafening, or at least a shrieking Essence of Wrath, which is for flat lightning damage, and just slapping it on a claw until you get either crit chance or attack speed, and then you can craft the missing one. This should take no more than a handful of essences. If you're buying shrieking or even deafening for like a chaos, this should be very cheap to get yourself a pretty endgame claw. Jungroan had a very similar claw to this, and he was able to clear wave 30 simulacrum on this build with this setup. So yeah, this build has pretty nutty damage due to the mastery, which I forgot to talk about a little bit here. I guess I'll mention that real quick. The super important mastery for your damage, especially when it comes to clearing the endgame juiced content, is this one. Projectiles deal 20% damage for each enemy pierce. Now, the thing about Spectral Helix is that it has infinite pierce. It just goes on and on and on, and every single time it pierces a monster, it gets 20% increased damage. So in something like a simulacrum, we're looking at something like 1,000% increased damage. There is no limit to this scaling. More monsters, more damage. It is busted. Not only that, we get a ton of actual sustain on our flask, so we basically have permanent uptime on flask because of the gain 4 charges when you're hit by an enemy. Now, we get hit quite often. We have a lot of mitigation when we do get hit. We have cap spell suppression, cap resistances. You could go positive chaos resistance if you get some on your gear, but this is super budget gear. 5,000 life. You could easily go way higher than that. Again, this is super budget gear. The evasion and the armor look low right now, but that's because none of my stuff is actually enabled. So if I go ahead and enable all this, you'll see that we are quite tanky. At let's see, 30,000 evasion and 17,000 armor, so not bad at all. 600 energy shield for the ghost shrouds as well, so pretty good there. Now looking at this, the rest of the gear other than the claw, we're going for basically very budget. It's going to be life and suppression where we need it, otherwise resistances and attributes, because as I said, we need 155 of all attributes. So life, resistance, spell suppression. Now one thing about the helmet, which is going to be very important, is that you get the trigger socketed spells when you focus. Now this can be you can get this from unveiling any helmet, and it's not that rare. So just make sure that you pick up some veiled helmets prefixes for this. This is how we are going to get a lot of our single target damage, like burst, and also we're going to get onslaught. So looking at the helmet setup here, you'll see that in the helmet with the trigger, we are going to be triggering tornado, which is like a lot more damage, onslaught, which is move speed and damage, of course, from the attack speed, hydrosphere, which is going to be proccing our exposure for minus 18%, which is pretty damn huge, and increased duration just to make sure that they last longer. But you could also put in something else here. Now the issue is depends what you put in, because it would get triggered. So don't go putting, I don't know, like a flame dash or a portal in there, because it's just going to keep triggering it. Okay, next, the body armor is another one that is very specific. You will need this gain 10% of maximum life as extra energy shield. Now this you can get from actually Gravicious modifiers. So you need to unveil Gravicious chess pieces. Now you can't get this modifier from non-Gravicious chess pieces, so you might have to ask like a friend or a streamer or something like that, community member, to actually craft this on for you if you aren't getting too lucky, because this is where we're going to get the vast majority of our energy shield for our ghost shrouds. You remove this, you basically have no ES on your build. Next, life resistance suppression on some gloves, boots, life resistance suppression, amulet, life resistance, life resistance, and it's going to be very important either on the gloves or on the amulet that we get 1 accuracy roll. It could actually be on the rings as well. And what I would recommend is a strength and intelligence base for the amulet, because those are the 2 attributes that you'll need the most, but something like an all attributes is also fine. But yeah, big accuracy rolls is going to be very important to increase our accuracy rating over here, because we don't run precision, or at least we don't want to, but we might have to, right? As you can see here, my mana is plenty, like 102 mana, especially for a claw build, due to the fact that we get mana gain on hit, and we have I made sure to have like non-channeling crafted on my rings as well, so it makes it so of course the mana cost is less. You could actually have 2 of those crafted, the non-channeling mana cost, so that's kind of what's going to be happening. But yeah, like here for example, you can see we definitely don't have enough. So what I could do here is actually drop let's see, probably drop the increased duration for precision, because it and then just lower that to where I have like a pretty decent amount of hit chance. Another thing I could do here is basically grab this mastery accuracy and maybe drop like a life node, and then I'll be able to push my my precision way higher, right? Because this precision mana reservation efficiency, so I'll be able to push that up and still be plenty on mana and cap out my actual hit chance. So I guess that's what I'll do. Okay, but yeah, very basic gear. Same thing here, you know, life resistances, blah blah blah. Now the flask, as I said, I would highly try to get this, but it's not like you need it, but it's good if you can get the gain charges when you're hit by an enemy. But it is a pretty rare modifier, especially if you want to get a good suffix alongside it. So not a like main priority, but something you'll definitely want to aim for, especially if you push this build to level 90. Is going to make it so you basically have infinite flasks. Now your jewels are empty. They're basically just life, and the reason for that is because you have 3 jewels, which are completely up to you. We have so much crit multi on this build, it doesn't make sense to get on the jewels. So you could use those to basically cap out your resistances or cap out your attributes if you need that. So maybe you'll be able to have like 2 non-channeling mana costs for your skills and stuff like that. For quality of life, it really is up to you what you want to do with your jewels. Okay, now eventually you're going to make the swap from that to Omnishot, which I predicted to be around level 90. And the thing is, what I would recommend doing is play with the Spectral Helix once you have the whole setup going, and then start buying these pieces of gear one at a time. And then once you have all of them, make the swap. Because the thing is, if you don't have all of these, you won't be able to play Omnishot, right? You won't be able to play it if you don't have, you know, the Gale Sight, the Brisk Wrap, obviously the Amulet, the Mark of the Elder, the Cyclopean Coil. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and you kind of need to have all of them. But looking at the gear, obviously we're going to go with a Tri-Elemental Bow, because that's, you know, just the best way to scale elemental damage right now. And Omnishot for sure, especially on a budget. The Quiver, it's going to be very important that you have one big accuracy roll. Now the accuracy roll could be on the Quiver, but it could also be on the gloves. But you need one roll with a big accuracy. Could also be on a ring as well, actually. Otherwise, just basic life, multi, prod speed, wed, stuff like that. Gale Sight is going to be your helmet of choice because Secrets of Suffering Jewel is extremely expensive, especially early on. So Gale Sight's a good way to get access to Brittle without breaking the bank. Brisk Wrap is a solid chest piece, which is really cheap. It gives us attack speed, it gives us move speed, and it gives us % dexterity, which is great for omniscience. And the reason we're going with that is, yeah, it's just because the price, it drops us a 6 link from a bunch of different league mechanics, and you can get it for really cheap. So that's why we're going with that. Gloves, life, suppression, attack speed, attributes, stuff like that. Remember, also an accuracy roll if you don't have it elsewhere. Adziri Step could be interchangeable. It's very easy to get the required amount of spell suppression, so this could be just a pair of rare boots instead. But Adziri Step are nice because of the amount of evasion that they give you. Crystallized Omniscience with the utmost intellect. Anoint is definitely the way to go. Super cheap Anoint, super strong. We're going to go with a Shaper Ring with attributes, life. Very important that we have the non-channeling skills here, because we are going to use a Mark of the Elder, which means we can't have it twice because obviously we can't have it on the Amulet. So one on the ring, on a Shaper Ring to proc our Mark of the Elder. As you can see, this is a lot of damage over here. Due to the increased stack damage if the other ring is a shaper item. Cyclopean Coil, very cheap belt that gives you 74 life and some attributes. And here's a cool thing about this belt, because we are a ranger, our dexterity, our base dexterity is always going to be the highest. So because our dexterity is higher than our intelligence, it gives us cannot be frozen. So that's kind of nice, right? You just cannot be frozen as soon as you are wearing this with Crystallized Omniscience. In terms of our flasks, there's not really any options here other than this. I would highly recommend, you're already going to be squishy, so don't make yourself squishier. I would run a Jade and a Stibnite. There's not really any reason to go with a Granite because we have no real armor, but you could drop the silver for that instead if you think that'll make you a little bit more tanky. In terms of the jewels, it's very important that we get a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency for the non-channeling mana cost, because again, we don't have it on the second ring, and it's extremely important that we have we have it twice. Next, Lethal Pride. This could be interchangeable with a Brutal Restraint instead. There's no real difference. The Lethal Pride is going to give us strength, I believe, on the small nodes, while a Brutal Restraint would give us like dexterity or something. But overall, no real difference there. Lioneye's Fall. Now this jewel is one of the backbones of this build. It gives us a ton of crit, and also a ton of attack speed. So this is where we're going to be putting that. It's a relatively cheap jewel, even early on. But again, there's a lot of moving pieces and you need all of them to make this build work. Okay, next, eventually you're going to start making a little bit of currency, because this build, even with this current setup, is capable of farming Uber Elder. If you know the mechanics, it can kill Maven, it can kill Invitations, anything short of the Feared or the Hidden, it's going to be able to do, as long as you're not sitting inside a damage, right? If you tank as Minnow Slam, yes, you're gonna die. However, are you gonna be able to kill Minnow very quickly? Absolutely. So that's kind of the situation there. So you should be able to farm currency once you get this setup going. Now we're going to move on to the budget setup, which is kind of where we are going to start being a little bit less scuffed. Now the budget setup, still the same sort of thing when it comes to the bow, the quiver, the helmet. One of the big changes is that we're going to move away from this horrible chest piece known as Briscrap to a Hyries Ire. Now this gives us a ton of spell suppression, which is going to save us a lot of nodes on the tree and a bunch of flat cold damage, which is huge. Dexterity, a ton of evasion. This chest piece is really fantastic for the non-tank version of this build. Then we're going to start having a little bit more currency here, so we're going to start messing around with Eldritch currency. We're going to get Intimidate, more spell suppression, life, attributes, attack speed, and remember that one accuracy roll is actually going to be either on your quiver or on your boots, or on your ring, or sorry, gloves, not boots. Boots at this point, just attribute suppression, life, move speed. Crystallized Omniscience, still the go-to, still the same ring, little attributes, life, non-channeling, shaper ring for the Mark of the Elder, and the Cyclopean Coil. Nothing else really changes. We are going to be getting a jewel socket in order to cap out our resistances, because one thing is, when we go to the setup, is we're going to be dropping Survivalist. So our resistances are no longer capped without this jewel, because Survivalist was actually capping out our resistances. So if we drop this for a jewel, this allows us to get a little bit more damage and a little bit more life. But realistically, you could just say, oh, whatever, I'll just do this, and instead I'll grab this life node, so I don't have to worry about getting a jewel. I'm still res capped. Maybe that's what you do instead. Doesn't really matter. Okay, now eventually, because this build is capable of killing the Feared, this build will do basically everything except like really juice maps, or for example, simulacrums. It won't be able to do simulacrums. It's too squishy, way too squishy, but it has insane damage at this level. So what's going to happen is you'll be able to farm invitations, bosses, whatever, mapping, all these different methods of making currency, which of course I'll have videos about in the coming days. Eventually you'll get to the point where you get to the Tanky Omnishot. Now this is the, I guess you could say, endgame recommended version of this build, before you go into the really expensive versions of this build. And what changes here is that we are going to start going for cluster jewels. So we're going to be dropping Lioneye's Fall, like I was talking about earlier. We're going to go into some clusters. We're going to drop a lot of drop that stuff. So one thing that's also important is, when we drop this, we are getting a lot of crit down here, so it's going to be very important that we get these nodes over here. As you'll see, this is level 92, so slightly higher level than it used to be. Another thing is, we'll be coming back to get more suppression, because we won't be getting enough suppression anymore on our gear. But going into the actual setup here, from the budget to the actual tank version, is going to be basically the same sort of item in terms of the bow, same sort of quiver. Now, at this point, we're going to go with an Asenath's Chant. Now, you can actually go Asenath's Chant before that, right? So the thing about the budget setup into the tanky setup, the first and main thing that I would recommend going from the budget to the tanky setup is going to be actually dropping Gilesight for Asenaths. Now, the thing about that is, you can only do that if you have another source of Brittle, which means you're going to have to dig deep in your pockets and grab yourself an Interrogation. Now, these can be very expensive, very expensive. Last league, they went all the way up to 14 Exalts, but it is really strong, so it makes sense why it's super expensive, and for this build especially, it's perfect. So yeah, that's going to be a really nice quality of life, because prior to that, until you get Galesight, you're going to literally need to put down an Arcanist brand in order to proc your Hydrosphere and your Tornado and your power charges. So once you actually get that, once you actually get the helmet, right, which is which is going to allow you to automate that process. So we're going to be dropping Hydrosphere. Now at this point, we have so much penetration on this build because we're an Omniscience build. We're not going to be benefiting that much from Hydrosphere, but we do benefit greatly from Tornado Shot. We're going to be able to automize Sniper's Mark without using Mark on hit, which is also really nice. And we are, yeah, it's just really good quality of life to actually go with Asnath Chant. It's also a decent helmet. Just overall gives you some attack speed, some move speed, some mana regen. Next, the body armor. Now this is going to be a great change from Hyri's Ire. We are going to go with a rare chest piece. This is something like 400 more life compared to Hyri's Ire, so it is a big deal. Especially, you know, the more life you have on your gear, it means even more. But yeah, so this thing is pretty solid. It's going to be very important that we get the implicits properly, which is going to be non-curse aura from your skills and the anger aura effect. Now this can be expensive, but again, this is kind of like the endgame setup. So this is where you farmed for like a few days or maybe a few weeks, and you get to this point, and this is where this build is going to start being capable of doing literally everything in the game short of deep delving, because deep delving is just not good for Secrets of Suffering due to the way that damage reduction works in Delve. But otherwise, yeah, you'll be able to do simulacrums at this point, pretty much. You might struggle in the final waves, but otherwise it'll be pretty good. You'll be able to do the Feared, no problem, Maven, Uber Elder. At this point, this is the game becomes a joke, and even more so if you're willing to push further, when you want to really slap things around like simulacrum and whatnot, but that's for a later video, I guess. But yeah, anyways. So yeah, we're going to go for suppression, big life, and of course, one thing that I absolutely love when it comes to my higher budget builds is getting avoid ailments. So we do get avoid ailments here on the tree, which is 20%, and we're going to get another 20% on the body armor for a total of 40, and we're going to round the rest completely with the boots, because we can get avoid ailments from an essence, and we can also get avoid ailments on the implicit. So the amount of avoid ailments we can get on boots is insane, which allows us to very easily cap out our ailment immunity, which means we can't be ignited, can't be shocked, can't be brittled, which is why I said this is really helpful for simulacrums, because, you know, if there's a brittle wave in simulacrum, you're basically just surely going to die unless you have like, you know, reduced damage from crits, because everything is going to crit you. Anyways, next, gloves, same sort of situation, life, suppress, attack speed, accuracy, attributes, stuff like that. Boots, same situation, except we're going to be adding this avoid ailments from the, I believe it's Essence of Loathing. Same amulet, of course. Now, we are going to be, once we go to the tanky setup, we're going to start running Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner, so we're going to be adding a 50% aura to the build, which means we're going to be lacking Matter Reservation, so we are going to need to anoint Sovereignty, and we are also going to need to get a Enlighten level 3 at this point, so at least we don't need a level 4. Matter of fact, we could probably get away with a level 2, but yeah, we will need Enlighten, and we will need Sovereignty, which means we are giving up a good bit of damage, because of course Utmost Intellect is quite a bit of attributes here. But that's just kind of the name of the game. Now, on our rings, it's going to be very important that we actually get some all resistances, because at this level of investment, we don't have enough we don't have enough omniscience to completely cap out our entire set of resistances. So we actually need to get a bit of resistances somewhere, and because we don't have any jewel slots open, as you'll see in a bit, we need to get it pretty much on the rings, or you could get it on the gloves, on the boots, somewhere like that. Yeah, you need to get some resistances somewhere, and I think all elemental resistances is a pretty devalued stats on rings, so it should be pretty easy to get these sort of rings for cheap with like 1 or 2 or, you know, decently rolled attributes. And yeah, still rocking the String of Servitude. It's a really good belt. Same thing for the flask, not really going to be changing. Quicksilver, Jade. At this point, we are going to be running Granite instead of Stibnite, however, due to the fact that we're running Determination. And also, I personally like to drop the Silver Flask for an Amethyst Flask for the Chaos Resistance. I like to be in positive Chaos Resistance, especially later on, you know, when you start doing things like Pure Chila, or Flawless Shula or the Feared, you definitely want to have positive chaos resistance, because with this level of defense, with evasion and armor being around like 25-30k, you can basically just face tank Shula if you have positive chaos resistance. Now, looking at the clusters, there's a lot going on, so I'm going to be going over it one at a time. The two large clusters are going to be the regular Feed the Fury, Fuel the Flight, Martial Prowess. Now, if you don't know how to craft these, you can basically just spam serrated fossils, and that's it. That's all you need, serrated fossils or attack reforges in Harvest. Now, they're not particularly hard to craft, but they're not particularly easy either. Now we are going to be rocking one cluster, which is going to be Eye to Eye and Repeater. These are super cheap. You don't have to craft them. You can buy them for barely anything. We are going to be rocking a small cluster with Enduring Composure. This is going to give us endurance charges for every second if we've been hit recently. So when we do get hit, it's actually going to give us endurance charges. This is huge. Very, very good for survivability. Highly recommend doing that. Next, actually on this setup, we are dropping a lot of our crit. We're also dropping, I believe, power charges. Are we dropping power charges? Yeah, we're also dropping power charges. So in order to cap out our crit, we will need a single actual crit medium. So the usual pressure pain and basics of pain. I mean, pressure points is, 5% DD, which is great, and then just a bunch of crit. And we are going to go with another small cluster, which is also mandatory, which is a 2 passive 6% mana reservation efficiency with uncompromising, which gives us Determination has 50% reduced reservation efficiency, which is kind of like having this evasion mastery twice. So this is also going to be necessary. Even if you have a level 4 Enlighten, you won't be able to run Determination without this cluster. Otherwise, on the second one, we're basically going to be slapping our Watcher's Eye, which is going to be life gain for each enemy hit by while affected by Vitality. This is insane for sustain. The moment you put this on your build with a level 1 Vitality, you are basically immortal unless you get one-shotted, because this build has so many arrows, so many chains, so many pierces and all that good stuff, right? That you are hitting tons of enemies. You will go from like 5% HP to full instantly. So highly recommend getting this Watcher's Eye. If you want to go for more damage, you'll be getting the Anger Critical Strike Multiplier instead. And then finally, the Interrogation Cluster Jewel, like I was talking about for Secrets of Suffering, giving us the Brittle for crit, and Scorch for negative resistances on enemies, and Sap is a reduced damage taken, which is basically for tankiness. Now, one thing that I will mention, finally, last thing I'll talk about is the bow, because the main stat that we care about that I just mentioned is Brittle, which is cold base. We want to make sure that the priority stat on our bow is cold damage. So if your bow has low cold damage, you will have a very hard time getting a good Brittle on bosses, especially on single target. So highly recommend crafting your own bow with deafening essences of hatred for flat cold damage, or just make sure that if you do buy a bow, that it has cold damage as its highest mod by far. And then the second one should be lightning. You don't want to have too much fire damage, because you're already going to be running anger for flat fire damage. And the thing is, if you have too much fire damage on your bow paired with anger, you might actually mess up your Trinity, which I guess I should take a second to explain. And I know there's a lot to take into this video. Be sure, if anything doesn't sound right or anything is confusing, just rewatch it a few times. There's going to be timestamps for that. Now, let me just quickly explain how that works. Trinity. Now, the way that Trinity works, and I'll be explaining that because it's actually also important for Spectral Helix, as you'll also be using Trinity for that. Essentially, Trinity requires you to have alternating elements that are hitting the hardest. So if you're always hitting the hardest with a single element, so let's just say that fire damage is always hitting the hardest, you are not going to get all your resonance. You're only going to get a single resonance, and this is bad because it means you're only going to get like a third of the value of Trinity. If you want to get the entire value of Trinity, you need these elements that are hitting the hardest to actually alternate. So the easiest way to do that, essentially the rule of thumb, is you want to look at your actual elements. So let me just go ahead and put the right tree, which is going to be going for tank, alongside the recommended version. And then I'm going to remove all of this. And then I'm going to turn on the actual setup. And I'm not sure the config is done right, but that's okay, don't matter. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and put our main skill here. So what you want to look for under the calcs over here is you want to make sure that when you look at your attributes here, the one with the highest maximum. So in my case, this is fire, right? I have 30,000 fire damage versus 18,000 cold versus 26,000. You want to make sure that the lowest amount of that is not higher than the highest amount of the two others. So in this case, the lowest amount of fire is actually higher than my highest amount of cold. But the lowest amount of my fire is not higher than my highest amount of lightning. My highest amount of lightning is 26,000. So that means that when I roll a low fire damage roll, and if I roll a high lightning damage roll, I'm going to be hitting higher with lightning, and then most of the time I'll be hitting higher with fire. But the thing is, resonance lasts for like 4 seconds, so as long as every 4 seconds one of your hits is high with lightning, and we're attacking like 5 times per second, you will have absolutely no problem. Now looking at the damage from this build, let's just see what we are looking at. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and make the proper setup. So in terms of arrows on our main skill, now this is still relatively budget gear, so we're not going to have a ton of arrows. So we have 7 arrows on our main skill, and our ballistas have 3 arrows each, and we have I believe 3 ballistas. So yeah, active totems is 3. So what we're going to do here on the main body armor, we're going to put that we have like, we're going to include in full DPS, say we have like 6 arrows, or let's just call it even 5 arrows. And then on our ballista setup, we're going to put 3 ballistas, 3 arrows, that would be 9 arrows. So we're going to say that it has, let's just say 6 or something. So that would bring us to a total of about 10 million DPS. Now that might seem a little bit low, but that's kind of the price to pay. Actually, it's a little bit higher than that because our brittle is going to be a little higher. So around 11 million DPS. Again, that might seem a little bit low, but that's kind of the price that you have to pay if you want to be tanky, and this is tanky. Now, of course, you can push this significantly higher if you want to push up the damage to literally like hundreds of millions of DPS, but I personally think that this level of damage is more than enough, and the tankiness that you get from it and the quality of life is worth way more than just pushing the damage more. Because you'll do more damage if you're alive to do the damage than if you were to do more damage but you were dead all the time. Not to mention, you'll be able to, level up, which is going to be nice, and overall it's just going to feel a lot better. So this is what I would recommend. Of course, later on in the league, I'll have an update to all of my league starters in terms of how to build them for later on with more investments. Okay, now, as always, before I go, I want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So Rascal, Brandon, welcome back, Thomas Mask, Nate, the Great Master, Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Novgar, Solomon, Exo, Jericosta, and Bitizen, as well as, of course, anyone else who has supported me in the past and anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. If your name is not on there, it's because I haven't updated the list yet. There's been a massive influx of new patrons, and I really want to say thank you guys for the support. Again, hopefully you guys learned a little something, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow for the General Cry build. Yeah, peace.